And live. All right, welcome back to another episode of Among the Ruins. I'm joined again by Ajax Telamon of the Thumos Rising Instagram page. Ajax, how are you?
I am tremendous, as is my custom.
Happy to hear it. So we're going to follow up with our last conversation where we discussed foundations and solutions for, let's just say, people on our side of things, or people that share a similar understanding of modernity and its consequences. Now, where I'd want to effectively start and build off of where we had our last discussion was a shifting to where the bullseye is in terms of where you need to prioritize your efforts. And I think I've settled myself in a position where you have to prioritize winning in the analog and not in the digital, meaning that you need to operate within the space that's outside of, for lack of a better term, just kind of the matrix of information. So it's priority of, I would say, land and family is effectively it. And that's where your biggest successes are going to occur, not only for multi-generational, procurement of a positive vision of what the future can hold, but also in a sense of it defanging and basically neutralizing the spurs and daggers that come from the other side of the issue. I would say the Leviathan is the term that I've been using back and forth, but there's plenty of other terms for it.
The Leviathan, Babylon, the beast system. There are plenty of terms.
Yeah, we could spend all day listing all the terms and risking getting banned in the means. But from that, Ajax, I know that maybe not stated directly in what you said, but I know that you have a high prioritization over effectively the real world, trade skills, prioritizing, owning land, learning how to tend that land, and shifting your vision to far more than just what I guess the opposite would be material comfort, material success, or wearing the decorations of success within the modern world itself, which is often like high influential positions or owning
expensive NFTs.
Yes. Yeah. In that sense as well. But then also, like I would say, like the LinkedIn achievement chasers, the white collar, it's a competition of your cover letter so that you have, the most thumbs up attached to your digital profile from people that also have thumbs ups on their digital profile, like this, like intangible, synthetic proof of credentialism, which is very rife. And I speak from this as someone that, I don't work in the trades. I do work within the professional sphere. And I see this credentialism as it's a very sad trap that captures a lot of very talented and smart people.
Well,
And
if I could cut in here, I would want to let the people know that you're also a personal trainer. You don't just work for a corporate monster. You help people get strong in reality too. So it's important. It's important to know that. Don't down talk yourself, JD.
No. I'm not denigrating my skills and talents. Like I know that the skills that I provide on an individual coaching basis, I know that they are high level. Effectively, what I'm trying to just denote is the sea of pressure that exists within the, for lack of a better term, the professional world, right? Which is a subset of modernity as a whole.
Well, I would say,
go for it.
I would say there's two categories of pursuit. There's the pursuit of tangible physical wealth, or analog, I think you said earlier, and then the hypothetical digital wealth. It's the difference between having physical bars of gold and having Bitcoin. And without going down that whole rabbit hole,
well, let me add to that. Like,
sure.
cast Bitcoin aside for sure. Chasing internet money is one thing, but what about chasing a PhD or chasing a vice president title or chasing a, yeah, go for it.
There's a lot of overlap as far as doing digital work that affects the real world. So me being in construction, we still have a whole, I guess you'd say, a digital side of things, our payment processing and scheduling and all of those things, but that's applying to the real world. So a PhD is itself in the category of hypothetical because it's just a piece of paper that denotes some accomplishment, but it may apply to the real. So if you get a PhD in architecture, then that's material value because you have material skills that apply to the real world. However, if you pursue that vice president position at, say, a digital design company, if electricity goes out, you're useless. So it would depend on what the PhD or accomplishment or title, what it applies to, if that makes sense. If it applies to the real and the material, or if it is solely digital, hypothetical.
Yeah, no, I'm in full agreement that there's a distancing from reality that occurs when you start living in the world of ideas or building a career in the world of ideas. But I think one thing that I struggle to contend with and want to arguably try and make more explicitly a potential problem that needs to be navigated is that the cultivation of the professional skills within the space of ideas, right? So like the PhDs, it's effectively just a recruitment agency for Leviathan itself, because there is yet to be a successful counterforce that pulls that demand for credentialed experts into any other system that isn't just a managerial system for modernity, right? So it feeds, it's almost like a grooming element to pulling in high skills, high intelligence towards the digital modern beast as it is. Is that coming through clear?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. The beast system is parasitic in nature. And so what it wants to do is to redirect the most potent energies into itself. It wants to try to absorb as much value as it can before that value reaches the people. So, you have large groups of people concentrating an extremely high amount of energy towards sports, and all of that raw power, all of that raw energy is essentially just going into a profiteering scheme. It's not about playing ball. It's about, that's my team from my state, and people go and pay tons of money, and you have all of these alpha male types that go into playing those sports who spend their lives making tons of money, getting injured, and exiting stage left. When back in the day, those people, those archetypes that become great sports players would have been leaders in an army, or would have been building their community physically. That energy that's always been around is now being redirected towards, whether it's things that make money and can be taxed by the beast system, or if the beast is taking it itself. If you look at the wars that the United States have been involved with for the past while, they haven't been exactly clearly justified, if you catch my drift. And that's a lot of young, genuinely brave, good-hearted men whose lives are taken by the beast for no other reason besides profit, and robbing the community of those men.
Yeah, and this is and I think this is where I've settled on the concept of the analog over the digital, because very much, if we go back to your sports analogy, which I think is very well put, because prior to all of the digital interconnection and all of the different screens that are available for you to witness all forms of entertainment, sports themselves was effectively it was closed off enough to where it was just the people playing the sport that were participating in. Yes, people came to watch, but going to watch the game wasn't effectively the ultimate thing about it.
Right.
In modernity now, it's about the entertainment of that sport. You could swap that sport out with anything else. All that matters is that it's broadcast on enough screens and enough people are watching it, and it's a commodity that can be used to that regard. And so,
right. And inherent with the extravagance of having such a large, profitable league like the NFL or the MLB or NBA or whatever, but not the WNBA, not that though. No, but the extravagance of those massive leagues inherently discourages people from doing it themselves, because it seems so distant and far off that most complacent people, rather than being encouraged to go pick up a ball, they would rather just sit and watch their favorite team. And as you said, back in the day before screens, people would be far more inclined to go get in the mud themselves and go play and do it, because they couldn't do it. They couldn't vicariously do it through somebody else with a screen.
Yeah. And very often in the earliest forms of all these sports, it was people from the local town playing against either other people within that town or a town nearby. And it was filled by all of the different, labor positions. And as soon as it turned into a commodity where effectively you wanted to start turning individuals rather into representations of their town, but just different economic units that could be swapped and traded across these different towns, different cities.
Right. Absolutely.
You lose so today, someone in Pittsburgh roots for their football team that's filled with a bunch of people that aren't from Pittsburgh, that have no affiliation to the town other than they live there for the term of their contract until they either end their career and go somewhere else, or they get traded to another town, where we just live out that same, pretend connection again.
Absolutely. And along with that, when you have people that, rather than fixating on a team, fixate on a player. So say they love Brett Favre on all the different teams he was on, or Peyton Manning or whoever else, they follow the player themselves. Well, when you have men especially who fixate on a figure like that as a form of role model, they're looking up to and giving their energy to someone that is just going to keep throwing the ball. They're not looking up to them for the family they built, or for the cathedral they built, or for the battle they won. They're concentrating all of this energy and all of this aspiration to someone who's ultimately just playing a game. And that, I believe, keeps people from higher aspirations, because they're happy to just watch the football go by, rather than aspiring to somebody who accomplished a lot in the real world beyond what are literally gains. And there are so many different ways that sports, just as one example, hijacks energy. And that's not even getting into the whole metaverse aspect of the beast that's trying to completely pull people into the digital.
Yeah, a genuine a non-exitable synthetic existence is effectively the ultimate goal that is being forced upon you. And not to belabor the sports part, but there's an interesting trend that I'm certainly noticing that is now extending into even now into the college game, because now that there is, in some limited capacity, an ability to pay college players money from the NC2A, which used to be part of an illegal, that used to be illegal to effectively pay 18-year-olds to come throw a football at your backwater school in Nebraska. But now that the levels of corruption within the NC2A have effectively gotten too big, that it's it's too obvious to try and hide. They've knocked down a few of the walls to effectively just allow them to be corrupt. And it's sold back to the audience as like, no, this is good for the athlete. This is good for the 18-year-old who's, exceptionally talented to be tempted with, $100,000 contracts to, go to Florida and play this game. It just like the level of corruption is only going to magnify. But the way that the current ecosystem works is to actually broadcast every next level of corruption and that more atomization down to the individual.
Well, before moving into that, I'd like to mention right along with what you said about them being paid, these young men are being offered, in some cases, millions of dollars per year if they're getting into the NFL. And it's essentially a bribe to do nothing with their lives.
Well, and conform to anything that the league then mandates down. I mean, and that's the other thing is like you start looking at the last 2 years, and I'm not a sports ball fan. I just live in this world enough, and I study the dynamics of how these power interactions work. And you look at how the league set the standard on what social justice messages can be portrayed, and there's like effectively it's like there used to be a space where politics and sports could arguably, granted, there's maybe always some sort of crossover, but arguably there was a time when you could just watch the sport and you got to disconnect from the political world in some form.
Well, we're at a point in time when the beast has reached its hand so far forward that we can all plainly see each finger is a part of the same hand.
Right. And it's just, and like these different avenues that attract so much attention and energy for the sake of entertainment. Now, yeah, you're watching sports, but you're also watching a massive tool of propaganda to establish a false moral framework and to basically just be one more avenue of layering these messages until everyone repeats them the same way.
Absolutely. Their strategy is bombardment.
Yeah. And that fan attachment to as you're saying, like that fan attachment to these individual players, none of these players are going to speak out against the message and, effectively have a career afterwards.
Except my man, Kyrie Irving. Shout out Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I guess I haven't followed anything that happened there. I'll have to check in and see. But
yeah, you best look into my man Kyrie Irving.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot that there was a demand to make his own medical decisions, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
Yes. Well, so even with that, with the size of the Leviathan, the number of tools and weapons it has at its disposal, and the reach of all its different tentacles, fundamentally there has to be a reorientation to elevate the analog as the primary center for where you as an individual that wants to live in some form or fashion on your own terms, you're going to need to prioritize the analog.
Right. Well, monopolizing the analog is the goal, one of the goals of the beast, mentioning the meta system and all of that. If they can get people totally immersed into the digital, their meat suits still need maintenance. They still need some form of food, although not very much and not high quality because they're not expending energy or building their bodies, but they still need some material maintenance. And so the beast comes in and says, that's fine. You stay in the digital. Just keep letting us siphon your energy, and we'll provide you with what analog needs you have, with what physical needs you have. And the only way anyone can hope to escape the human farm, to escape the beast system, is to develop enough analog wealth to not rely on the beast system for anything. And this is where real skills come in. And this isn't to say that everyone needs to know how to do every single thing to homestead, but it's to say, if I can repair your roof, or if I can build you a deck, you can give me some milk or some eggs or a dog. The way I got my dog He's a Kangal Shepherd, a wonderful dog, giant dog. And I didn't pay $1 for him. I paid in labor. And that is how you develop self-sufficiency, is by networking with people with similar values that have real physical wealth, and having physical wealth yourself that you can offer in exchange. This is why it's crucial for us to develop these skills, not only for ourselves and to be self-sufficient, but so that we can offer those other people value in the areas where they lack it. So not everyone is going to be savvy in carpentry like I am. Not everyone is going to be knowledgeable about the body like you are. And so by having some tangible skill, we can cover each other's bases and move towards exiting.
Yeah. And it's another reason why prioritizing your talents into a trade are going to, I mean, they'll reward themselves in many other ways other than just financial. They'll reward you in time by being someone that has the opportunity to bring skills that have tangible effects in the way that people can orient themselves within their environment, like truly. And again, so the digital offers so many tricks where you think you have a skill, but effectively all you have is an ability to manipulate an interpretation. And you can get really,
the ability to manipulate the hypothetical.
Yeah, you can get really good at that, and that's effectively just the hallmark of the beast itself. But underneath it, there's going to be some need for you to have an honest relationship with reality, which is going to come down to skills that allow you to interact with it authentically.
Absolutely. And I'd mention along with that, you talked about, excuse me, give me a moment. I lost my train of thought. You worded something perfectly. You said, jog my memory, JD.
I'm not sure. I said, I've been rambling a lot here.
Oh, acquaintance with the real world. That's what it was. Acquaintance with the real world. One of the additional benefits of trade work and working in reality is it prevents you from lying to yourself. If something isn't level, you can't lie to yourself and say it is. If it's not flush, you have to fix it. If it's not straight, it won't bear weight properly. And so working in the real world acquaints you with reality. And so much of the beast agenda is to convince people that everything is subjective. Look, when I'm building a deck, whether or not the post is level is not subjective. Reality is not subjective. Perceptions are, tastes in art and food and all of that are. But reality, as far as building things, as far as actual wealth, is set in stone. There is logic in the real world. And the more you practice, so to speak, being in the real world, the more you are acquainted with that, the better you're able to detect the patterns of life, because you know what the trends are, you know what the patterns of reality are, and it allows you a reference point when encountering anything else in your life.
That's all perfectly stated. That's exactly correct as far as what I see and what I would encourage others to do. Now, there's one question I do have that follows on from this, and I think this is a tricky one for a lot of us to navigate. And it doesn't mean that we need to find a solution here and now, but we can at least try and talk through part of the sticky issues that are associated with it. So, say you have a small collection of people within a local community that all share the same values towards building the skills that allow for a mindset of exiting, and you can follow through on all those practices. What do you do when either someone within your community or someone within your kind of like local perimeter that maybe is someone that is of necessary, that has a necessary skill contributing? What happens if they start drifting towards effectively the temptations of, the reach of Leviathan? How do you stop someone from selling their land next door to you so that they can put in a bunch of small condos and basically just import a bunch of California mindset into your local
Well,
community? Go
you
for it.
point at the boomers and you say, that's what they did. Do they look happy?
I don't know if that's going to be a necessary solution for someone that's effectively. I mean, that would work for me. I understand what you're getting at, but
That's the only thing I really could say. It would depend a lot on the quality of the people around you. But
yeah,
if you are in the real world working with analog wealth, physical wealth, then chances are your community is going to be higher value on the scale of things. So if somebody is considering that, I would just say to them, listen, what you have in this land or whatever it is actual wealth, and it's something that can reap benefit to you if you get animals or if you get uh, a garden, and even if you paid somebody to maintain it, at least you would still have physical wealth. You would still own true value.
mm-hmm.
And if that wasn't enough to convince them, then perhaps nothing would be. If you're that set on acquiring shekels over hills, then that's your own doom.
Yeah, and it highlights that is the battle we're up against, is that the way that the modern culture operates is that it incentivizes a short-term connection with the land should you need it.
Yeah,
Because Leviathan is always lurking in the back end, waiting for its opportunity to take what you've built and effectively just allow you to sell your soul, for lack of a better term. Granted, everybody's circumstances are going to be different, and this doesn't like negate people trying to find opportunities to sell what they have and then move someplace better or move to a community that they can build. I mean, a lot of people are in positions
you can trade up.
Yeah, a lot of people are in positions where they want to trade up, but it's hidden within that too, is part of the battle we have to fight. And again, not trying to find a solution, but just noting that it's within that space of, arguably, because we live in such a commercialized aspect of connection to land that there is no sacred land anymore. The concept of land being sacred is effectively what keeps it from ever being uprooted or lines being crossed. But because land is not sacred by, the shared interpretation, this risk always emerges. And this is mostly me flirting with black pills, not one that I would ever demand. But I mean, it's part of this analysis that is necessary too.
Absolutely. In order to pursue a solution, you have to understand what the problem is. Mm-hmm. And this is a crucial step of that process. And it's a large process with many, many micro steps in the midst of it. But understanding the problem is critical. And as far as in response to what you were saying about the inherent value of land, the sacredness of certain buildings or acreage or what have you, one of the primary aims of the beast is to deconvince people of inherent value, to convince people that human life doesn't have inherent value, to convince people that certain places don't have inherent values or belief systems don't have inherent value. They want to convince people that life is meaningless and that we're all an accident and what you do doesn't matter, so you might as well pleasure yourself. And with that dynamic, they can come in and buy that generational land that was owned by one family for the last 200 years because they convinced all it takes is one generation. They convinced one generation that it didn't matter. And so all of the boomers sold their plantations for Buicks and pretty much screwed us. So we have to reclaim real value. We have to return to the values of our ancestors, however recent or ancient, and begin pursuing tangible wealth again. And we're in a position where we've seen the alternative. We have watched what happens when people discard their analog wealth, when they abandon the pursuit of actual skills. We've seen what happens. And we also know from history what happens when people dedicate themselves to higher ideals, when people dedicate themselves to something greater than their life, which, however valuable it may be, and I do believe human life is very valuable, in the scheme of things, we are all here for a relatively short period of time. So what kind of mark are you going to leave? Are you going to have a bunch of children and a farm and teach them the value of analog wealth, of physical wealth, of real skills, and encourage them to teach their children and create a dynasty? Or are you going to jerk yourself to death in a basement? The choice is yours.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a necessary connection to the sacred at some point. You're going to have to reconnect yourself to something that is, I think the term that I would use is that it's non-negotiable. And hearkening back to what you mentioned about the tools of the beast are to turn everything into a term of, or into a sense of relativity, so that you actually don't have any sort of necessary obligation or duty to anything other than pursuing your own pleasures that come at whatever the Leviathan would want to offer you. But by reconnecting to the analog, you're going to build the opportunity to reconnect with the sacred. You could even, probably even the other way too, by trying to pursue the sacred, you're going to find yourself naturally realigning back into the analog.
Well, they're entwined. When
Correct.
you spend time in the real world, you see the divinity of it. You see the consistency and the through lines and the patterns, like I mentioned earlier. And a man can't walk through a forest every day for years and be an atheist. It doesn't work that way. And so the more people get acquainted with reality and the more people see the brilliance of life and the beauty, which is an intangible. Beauty isn't something that can be 100% nailed down, but we all agree on certain things. Everyone that isn't morally, or rather spiritually dead, everyone that's not spiritually dead thinks sunsets are beautiful. Everyone that has some semblance of light in their eye, some faint happiness in the world, thinks sunsets are beautiful. And so there are consistencies even there. But when people are completely wrapped up in the digital, which is largely not completely monopolized, but largely monopolized by the beast and its companions, it's so easy to fall into a pessimistic view of things. And you even see a lot of people on the quote unquote right, a lot of people that might even share some of our beliefs, you and I, who are pessimistic because they live in the digital. And so much of the digital is dedicated to beating down your soul and eroding your conscience and eroding the thought that you can do anything to change the world, because you can see such an unnatural concentration of dysfunction just from one phone. Like, who in history could read through 200 different stories of murder or rape or whatever it is on their phone in 1 hour? Like, you didn't used to be able to be exposed to that amount of despair unless your city was sacked, in which case you wouldn't be around much longer to think about it anyway. But so many people sit in, day out, just looking at how awful everything is. Oh, can you believe what the left did this time? And they're useless. In fact, they play into the beast's agenda perfectly, because despite them possibly knowing what the beast is up to, they've resigned themselves to the beast's power, and so they become useless.
Right. Yeah. Hopelessness is a major tool to just keep you on your heels so that you remain passive. If you have
And one
no
of the best
faith in any of
ways to
your
be
actions.
hopeless is to stay online all the time. That will make you hopeless if you spend all of your time in the digital. That's what it's designed to do.
Yeah, I am in a full agreement that the more that you plug yourself in, the more that you effectively just lose the internal energy to be active on things that would be of higher value. The the demand of the screen is to keep you on the screen. It has no other need. Like, so you have to be very conscientious when plugging yourself in, for lack of a better term. But I know that that's also widely discussed here. We don't need to necessarily belabor the point and finger wag at people for spending too much time online.
Well, there is a positive way to use technology, but it requires a great deal of discipline. And so, of course, I'm attempting to build my presence on Instagram, and you have your various social medias that you're promoting and expanding. And that doesn't make us a part of the despair engine because we're
Correct.
using the technology for good. And that is perfectly possible by everyone, but it requires a great deal of discipline, and it requires the will to maintain your principles and the will to avert your concentration from all of the dysfunctional shit.
Yeah, I've had countless conversations with people through these different channels that were incredibly motivating and white pilling against it. It's honestly, the more that I talk to people that maybe aren't online contacts of mine, but spend their time just flipping from one stream subscription to the next. The normie, for lack of a better term, is just fully content with whatever the next thing is they can plug themselves into. So as a recommendation for anyone on our side and someone looking for strategies to start implementing solutions in their own life, I would absolutely recommend try and find an online community or build an online group, even if it's just like you and 4 members of people that share similar demands for the development of analog skills. And you can keep it there to start. It doesn't need to go beyond it, but gatekeep at the level of, do you have a set of skills that you are building? Are you willing to communicate regularly with people online and use that online access to gain a level of accountability and development to, a collection of others that are trying to do the same? Because that level of connectedness around these ideas is absolutely necessary so that you can keep honestly, so you can keep the spark and the fire going, knowing that you're not completely isolated. If you're in a position where you feel isolated, arguably, definitely find those people in reality first and build a physical community. But this solution is certainly for those that would otherwise be online and maybe feeling a little disconnected and surrounded by people that are living off of the temptations of Leviathan.
Right. And that's one of the positive aspects of this technology is just like you can view an extremely high concentration of dysfunction throughout the world, you can also, if you're willing to and you choose to, you can also find the beauty that is throughout the world. You can also find your fellows that share ideals, not necessarily all ideals, but enough to get along and have that accountability that you mentioned. And so there's a ton of value to be used there. We've sort of been dissing technology largely in this conversation, but of course we wouldn't have met were it not for technology. We wouldn't be having this conversation were it not for technology. And so it's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or ill. Guns don't kill people; people kill people. We all recognize this, and so it's important to bear that in mind. Although I certainly have a lot of respect for the Amish.
Absolutely. I just wish that they were. I personally aspire to find a world where we're all living kind of like the Amish, but we're all kind of more jacked and bodybuilder-esque. But that's my own personal utopia.
Right. Well, that's one of the tremendous aspects of the people in our generation that are moving towards the light, is because in large part of the technology we're using now, we have access to viewing not only not only the inspiration that might have us want to get a trade job or want to get real skills, but also access to the inspiration of the magnificent acts and accomplishments of history, of ancient history, and of all those other things that were made by a generation that believed in something higher, a generation that shared an upward gaze towards glory, that shared the desire to weave meaning into their work for the sake of it being good, for the sake of it being elevating to the soul. And so as our generation matures and we have more and more young men decide to develop actual wealth and actual skills and unite and grow and multiply and have children, they're going to build a beautiful world. I was having a conversation with my lady about this the other day, and I said, right now, all of us, all of the people that are getting serious about changing the trajectory of our lives, we're just starting. I haven't even had my first child yet, and you've had 2 or 3, I think. But we're just getting started. I don't know how many you plan to have, but I hope it's more than 5. But as an example, Forrest Munden, who we all love very much, just had his first, and he plans to have like 8 plus or something. I don't remember the number, but we're all just getting started. If we're successful, if we can persevere and have those 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 children, just like our great grandparents used to, and teach them value and teach them meaning and truly raise them with love, actual love, and watch them blossom and have their own children and really start building beauty back into the world. The goal, if we're all successful, would be to pass our twilight years looking out on a world that's blooming, on a world that is building itself back towards divinity and truth.
Yeah, that's very beautifully put, and definitely something that I aspire to as well. And along the lines of something you mentioned before about how, yes, we are trashing technology a lot in this, but purely from the point of technology being a practical attack vector for something that is arguably anti-human nature. I will also say that as a testament to the power of technology for the good, that within my own circles, it was through the connectability of the internet that I was actually able to find people that have affected me in the real world. I have a small group of people in my local area that we all met online, for lack of a better term. We actually met in a different state, going to a different event. And we were, all coming from the same place that, because it's such a homogenized ideological hotbed, those that are smart enough to navigate it and live their life as best they could, like that pressure gradient causes talent to rise. And so now there's a group of 7, 8, and this group is growing as well. We're able to meet in real life. We have barbecues. Multiple of us are having children. 2 of us are on their first kid. As Ajax said, I've got 2. So it's very beautiful to see opportunities for the culmination of families that are oriented around values that aren't interjected with just the nonsense from, I would say just like the manufactured morality of the modern world. We actually have an opportunity to build these things. Now, this is the stuff that churches effectively provided throughout all of time. And me having spent the majority of my life in a space that is remarkably unchurched, the power of that kind of shared locality around value is incredibly immense.
Yeah, I imagine you could see the gap in that culture when it misses things like that. It becomes apparent quickly. But a good gauge for whether or not how you're using technology is good or ill is, as you were saying, you met these people online. The question is, are you using the technology in a manner that benefits the real? Are you using the digital to improve the analog? And whether that's accountability, whether that is actually physically meeting up in person, whether that is learning something online that you then apply to your real life, that's how you know, is it benefiting you in reality?
Yeah, I think probably a good place for us to probably close is on that point, is that regardless of the degree to which you use the digital or rely on the digital, it always has to be subservient to the analog. It can never be a top priority. It has to sit second order to where the analog should reign at the highest level, because it's at the analog where you can actually experience the transcendent. The digital can just sell you a false vision of reality, a synthetic reality.
Right.
If you mine the digital for all it's worth and find the true, honest bits of useful, practical implementations, you can benefit the analog immensely.
Absolutely. And the gut check question that I would ask anybody that's thinking about these things and wondering, or assessing rather, their value. The question is, if the grid goes down and shit hits the fan, are you an asset or a burden? And if you can be honest with yourself about that, you can move in a good direction. If you are an asset, then improve those assets. If you'd be a burden, then you need to make some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will close out there. That's a good question for everyone who took the time to tune in to ponder. And then from there, however your answers pan out, it should give you a good orientation of where to direct your energies to follow. So Ajax, anything to say in closing before we kind of do our final bits here?
I would say, if you're somebody who has spent a large amount of their time predominantly in the digital, and you're hearing this and feeling some form of conviction, start working towards the analog. Take whatever small steps that you can now. And so if that means going for a walk once a day, every day, start doing that, and continue to make better choices that acquaint you better with reality, and eventually move towards getting a trade job, whether that's construction or being a mechanic or even something like a personal trainer. Move towards the real, move towards things that affect real life. And it'll be uncomfortable at first, it being so different, the world of the analog being so different than the world of the digital may be jarring, but you'll adapt to it and you'll grow in a way that you can't grow through the digital.
That's greatly put. All right. Thank you, Ajax, for your time. Look forward to talking to you again soon. For everybody else, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you at the next episode. Goodbye.
Peace.